Hey y'all, it's Andrea here at VW Family Farm, and I have a video today that I've been wanting to make for a while, and it is about cattle, and specifically about heifers. So you would want to start thinking about, are you going to keep heifers or are you going to buy heifers, for a couple different reasons. One is maybe you want to grow your herd. So a lot of people, if they want to grow their herd, they just across the board keep all of their heifers. They never sell their heifers. They either sell their bulls, or maybe they steer them and raise them for beef, or maybe they just sell them at the sale barn as steers. So that's one reason. Maybe you're wanting to expand your herd. Another reason is maybe your cows are getting on up there in age, and you know you need some replacement heifers to replace cows that are getting on up there in age. Both of these scenarios apply to us and probably apply to a lot of cattle producers. Most cattle producers are always looking to grow. Maybe at some point you reach the perfect number and you're like, I don't want to grow anymore from here, but people starting out like us, we want to grow. But we also have old cows that we have to think about. They are not being very productive, and it's gonna be time to get rid of them soon. Historically, people used to breed their heifers for the first time at about 2 years of age. That was just kind of the standard practice. But as systems have gotten better, we've learned more about cattle, just all kinds of factors played into it. Now, people breed them as soon as they start to cycle, usually around 12 to 14 months of age. And a lot of heifers are calving by the time they're 2 years old instead of just having their first breeding. So that's something that has changed and kind of trended younger and younger, and it again just makes cattle systems more efficient, and it's just the way it's done most of the times these days. Before we move on from this, I do want to note that at that age of puberty, which is going to vary by breed, they should be 55 to 65% of their mature weight. So if you kind of have a rough idea of what your cows weigh, your calves should be 55 to 65% of that, your heifers, when you go to breed them the first time. And that should happen between 12 and 14 months of age, but there's a lot of factors in there. And breeds with the heavy Brahmin influence in those, they're going to probably be bigger, but they're going to cycle later. And then you're going to have instances as well where a heifer can still be nursing her mom and less than a year old and become pregnant, and they're usually going to have trouble at birth. Their birth canals are not even going to be fully developed by the time they give birth, and you're just looking, they're not usually going to be super large, and they're gonna struggle most likely. So you want to keep an eye out for that. That just happens sometimes, but it's something to at least take note of. So you can see that we have all different colors in our herd at this moment. We're trending towards more of a complete South Pole herd, and if you're not familiar with that, I encourage you to look it up. They thrive on grass. It's our favorite breed. We're trending more towards that, and maybe even a registered herd of those. But right now, we're in the growing phase. We're in the generating income phase, and so we're just growing slowly as we can. We do have out here beside me, he's watching me right now. Let me show you guys. Brucey! But that is Bruce. He's our South Pole bull, and then we have another one we just purchased that is a registered South Pole bull that is over with a group of very young heifers, first cycling heifers right now. So that's where he's at. He's a bit smaller. So let's get to it. Let's say you want to grow your herd, or you want to replace some cows. Whatever the case may be, you're looking to keep heifers. What do you need to know? Well, one of the major things to do right off the bat is probably get rid of any outliers at weaning time. And by outliers, that's just a term that's used to mean it lies outside of what you're wanting pretty far. So either they're just too big, because that can be a problem as well. We'll talk about that. Too small, too short, too tall, too this, too that, whatever the case may be, it's too far from what you're looking for. You might want to just go ahead and get rid of those right off the bat at weaning time. Another approach to that, though, is to keep everything. If it's a heifer, you keep it. And you put them with the bull when they're old enough, 12 to 14 months of age ideally, and you give them a couple of estrus cycles. So a couple things are going to happen at that point. They're going to get bred, so that means they're going to be a good fertile heifer for you. I'm not saying that they're going to be a good cow in your program for long term, but they are fertile at that point. Or they're gonna stay in there and they're not gonna get bred. And you're gonna know that if you're doing early preg checking and things after, you know, your bull has been in there for a certain amount of time. So at that point, that is your bull's way of sorting things out for you. That's the way of nature's way of sorting things out. And if they're bred at that point after a couple of heat cycles with your bull, you might want to consider keeping them and letting them at least calve a time or two on your farm, and then you can decide, this is not fitting into my program, maybe the color's wrong, maybe this, maybe that, whatever. But once you get your herd established, of course they're going to be the breed or the color or the this or the that you want. They may not be the height you want, they may not be the weight you want, but you're not going to have to cull based on those factors long term. So that's probably the easiest way to do it, is just keep them all and let nature sort it out. Let your bull do the work for you. But a lot of people don't do that. They don't want to do that. They want to sort them out at weaning time. And if that's what you're gonna do, you're gonna need some criteria, because it's gonna be, you're gonna have to know what you're doing to be able to tell from a calf that's being weaned what kind of cow you're talking that she might make into. So I want to give you, I'm going to stroll through my cows because it's my happy place, but I'm going to give you 11 quick tips to choose good heifers. And the first one I want to tell you is what I've already mentioned, is consider your outliers. So your medium, average size, average build heifers at weaning are probably going to make your best, most fertile cows. When cows are too big, that can be a problem as well. So that's your first tip, is get rid of any outliers. So let me clarify something I said earlier in the video. You're not necessarily aiming to breed them on their very first heat cycle. If your heifers, and this is point number 2, are born early in the calving season, those are some of the better heifers. They're better than bigger heifers even. Bigger doesn't always mean better, but if they're born earlier, meaning they're older heifers in your calving season, that's a better thing, because when you go to breed that group of heifers for the first time, those heifers that are older, they were born first in your calving season, they're going to have time to have a cycle or two before you're putting that bull in, because those younger ones weren't old enough yet. I hope that makes sense. And because they were born early in your calving season, that means they had good fertile mamas. The ones that were born later in your calving season, your younger heifers at weaning, are because their moms didn't cycle when the other ones did, or they didn't take, or something like that. So that is just going to be passed down to the next generation of heifers. So that's something to consider. Number 3, and this is easy, evaluate their disposition. Don't keep anything that's high-headed, flighty, nervous, because that is just a headache. It can be a danger and it's not fun to work with. Number 4, evaluate their conformation. How are they made up? Do they have feet and leg problems? If they do, that's a sure sign they need to go. That will just get worse as they age, and cows are only as good as their feet. If you've ever had one that had just overgrown hoof, you can tell how big of a problem that might be. Also, don't pick just the biggest, blockiest, muscularest looking heifers, because those aren't necessarily going to be your most fertile ones. In fact, they're probably going to be some of your lesser fertile ones. The ones that look definitely feminine and female, those are probably going to wind up being your best cows. If they look like a steer, then most likely they're having a bit of an endocrine situation, maybe some hormones are off, and that could cause them to come open. So you definitely don't want to just pick your biggest, blockiest looking ones. Make sure they look good and they can hold their weight. You don't want a heifer going into breeding that already looks poor and thin. They won't make it. They won't make it in a difficult environment. And you can see I'm walking through our fields. We're in a drought right now, so that's putting them to the test. Make sure they can hold on to their weight. Make sure they put on good weight. You're not necessarily going to tell that at weaning, because they could have just had a mom that has a lot of milk, and the mom could look pathetic, and that's a problem. But just evaluate, maybe if you're keeping them for a year, evaluate then. Are they holding on to their weight good? Number 6, look at the mama cow. Does she have good udders? Does she have good feet? Those are things to consider, because those things can be passed down. Does she have good calves? Like, does she calve early in your calving season? Does she lose her calf you know, every once in a while? Or does she have calves every single year? You're not gonna know that if her mom is a heifer, but if this is your best 10-year-old cow that's always produced you a good calf and she has a heifer, you are definitely gonna wanna keep that one. Number 7, and maybe one of the most important things in my opinion, because I do have a milk herd, and so I've been up close and personal with udders, and then I see the problems on our beef cows as well, is udders. Now, you're not necessarily gonna be able to tell a whole lot from them when they're calves, but you are gonna find some outliers. If you see a problem, you see one that's got big teats or teats that are way too long, you definitely wanna cull those right from the get-go. Number 8 is one you're probably gonna think this is crazy. I went to a cattle class and learned this, but when I first heard it, I was like, what? But those that shed the best are generally the most healthy, and that is true. And people that raise cattle know that. That has to do with their health and their vitality. And we just took a couple of outliers to our local sale barn and didn't get great money for them, and I guarantee you it was because they were fuzzy. If they shed off good in the spring, and they definitely look sleek and feminine, those are some good qualities. The next one is a bit more difficult, but if you are seasoned in cattle, you can spot a narrow pelvis. So a lot of people will go in and palpate manually and physically measure and feel for any obstructions like bone spurs or anything, but you can kind of just look at them and tell if they're really narrow, and if they are, they're more than likely gonna have some trouble, so those might not be ones you wanna keep. Number 10, if you can see the hip bone in this cow right here, I might not be close enough, but there is what's called hooks and pins back there, and it should be a sloped line. It should not be straight across. That's a fault we've bred into cattle. I'm gonna see if I can find another one, but that's a fault we've bred into cattle, and it makes calving a lot more difficult. So this girl, it's gonna be hard to see on our cows because right now we are in summer, and so they are fatter, but right up in that area is where the hook's going to be, and the pin should be a little bit lower. When they're a little thinner, you can see it should be a sloped line. If it's straight across, see, you can see her moving and that sticking out. That's what I'm talking about. That one's a little more difficult. That's not something you're probably the most average person is going to just look for. I wouldn't if I was choosing a heifer, but you can definitely Google a picture of a cow's anatomy and look up hooks and pins, and that just has to do with their ease of calving, and that's everything when you're talking about a heifer. And lastly, it is okay if your heifers or cows have like an angle to their back leg, like they call it cow-hawked. All wild animals have it, and we've sort of bred it out of some cows because people don't like the way it looks. But if you get their back legs too straight in your breeding program, your cows could have, again, problems calving. And let's face it, that's what we're talking about when we're keeping heifers, is how easily are they going to be able to have a calf, because that is going to be your lifeline. That's going to be your money and your income from these heifers. So that's my top 11 tips for choosing replacement heifers. I hope that helps somebody. And we're doing that here ourselves. We have a group of 22 heifers that we're testing out here, and we're gonna see how they calve here in the fall. They're gonna start calving here in a couple months. And then we have a group of 13 more from last year that are just now about 14 months old, and we just put the bull in with them. And so we'll see how that goes. And then our plan is to cull at that point. I will say though, if a heifer loses her very first calf, that's common. You're more than likely gonna have about 60% success on first-time heifers. I know that's kind of a startling number, but just because they lose their first calf, we've had several do that and then go on to be some great cows. So I wouldn't say cull them after the first time unless you just want to. There's a reason that you just don't want to keep them. But if there's something that you really like other than they lost their first calf, you might want to consider giving them another chance. And all of this, let's face it, is relative. It's up to you. What works in your situation? Do you have enough grass and ground that you can give some another chance? Or is it a one and done and they've got to go if they don't meet all your criteria? And different situations warrant different answers. I'll see you guys later. Thanks for watching, and God bless.